Good morning and welcome to Life at the Sci-Fair Library. My name is Rachel Hugenberg. I am one of the reference librarians here at Sci-Fair. And this morning I am super excited because we have librarian and photographer Bronwyn Sutherland here this morning to discuss with us basics of photography, and she's going to be answering some questions as well and to talk about portraiture. Bronwyn, if you would please.
Yes, hi. Thanks everybody for coming. This is my favorite, one of my favorite subjects in the world. So I'm really excited to talk. I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation here. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So yeah, I love to talk about photography. I could talk about photography all day long. I bore my husband with this subject all the time. So yeah, and this is me and my two kids. You'll be seeing a lot of them in this presentation. I used to take a lot of photos of them when they were young. They don't let me do that anymore, but photography is a huge passion of mine. I love mostly I love portraiture, and I love documentary photography. That's my favorite. I did study at the Houston Center for Photography for a year and a half, so I learned a lot there. They're great. I did work as what I would call a hobbyist photographer. So I started to kind of take pictures for money. I did portraiture, I did headshots, I did family photos, but the business side of it just completely turned me off. So I was glad to let that go. But it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. And I just want to say the best photos, in my opinion, are the ones that bring you joy. That's it, period. Because photography is, for me, it's about emotion, communication. And that's it. So I have my preferences when it comes to photography, but at the end of the day, it's what you love, the photo that brings you joy. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the difference between what I know. I'm no expert, but I'm just going to talk about what I know about the difference between the DSLRs and the smartphone cameras, the pros and cons of each. I'm going to talk about the tricks that photographers use and tricks that I used to get good photos. Mostly I'm going to be talking about portraiture because that's what I kind of specialized in, or what my interest was. I didn't do a lot of landscape or nature or anything like that. But I do know photographers that do that kind of photography. I know a little bit about it, but so I'll talk about that. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about all the smartphone kind of tips and tricks. Now I have an iPhone 12 Pro Max, so I'm going to, kind of talk more about what that phone is capable of. But I think a lot of these phones are kind of similar. They all kind of try to keep up with one another. So a lot of the features will be the same. So I'm going to talk about how you can get creative with your camera as well. So first, I want to talk about the difference between a DSLR and a smartphone. So a DSLR is a digital single lens reflex camera. Basically, it has a sensor in the back of it. Now, you can have either a full sensor DSLR or a crop sensor. The full sensors are much more expensive. I think I looked at the new Nikon, one of the new Nikons, the D850 this morning, just to curiosity. I wanted to see how much it was, and it was about $2,500 just for the body, and that's it. The crop sensor cameras are going to be cheaper. They usually run like anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 cheaper. Because the sensor is smaller, and so they don't perform quite as well, especially in low light. And that's what you want. Your camera is a light gathering apparatus. So the more light you can gather, the better. So those full sensor cameras, that's why they're more expensive. And that's what I have. I have a full sensor Nikon. I usually buy my camera secondhand. Because I've never had any problem with that. And I always buy the lens separately. I always tell people, if you're going to buy a DSLR, do not buy the kit lens. When you go on Amazon, you'll see they have the big package with the body and the lens and all this stuff thrown in. And I would never do that. I always buy the body and the lens separately because the lens is where the quality is. It's not so much the body, although the body helps, but it's really the lens. So really, a lot of professional photographers, they put a lot of their money into their lenses. I want to say also mirrorless is becoming really popular right now. I haven't played around with those, but I'm really, kind of eager to do that. Then the lens, like I was saying, this is the lens that I shot with this week, the Sigma 35 millimeter 1.4. So a lot of times those numbers are confusing for people. Basically, the 35 millimeter, it refers to your focal length. So like a 15 millimeter is like a fisheye, super wide. Whereas on the other end of that spectrum, you have 115 millimeter plus, that's your long angle. That's what you would use to take pictures of far, far off wildlife or something like that. So that's what that number is referring to. And then the aperture, the 1.4, it basically refers to how wide that aperture can open, the opening that takes in the light in your camera lens. That's how wide it can open. So basically the wider, the better, because the lower that number, the more light it can bring in, which allows for sharper, just better images and better performance in low light. So that's basically with DSLR. And then you have a prime lens and you have a zoom lens. Okay, so I always shoot with prime lenses. I'm one of those photographers that I just don't use zoom lenses. Number one, they're way too expensive if you want to get a good quality. If you want to get like this Nikon 24 to 70, 2.8. 2.8 is pretty good for a zoom lens, but you're going to pay a ton of money for that zoom lens for one thing. Those lenses can be like $2,000, just for the lens. So usually for those, I would rent those. I wouldn't buy those, and I would just buy prime. The only thing about a prime lens is that you're fixed in your focal length. You cannot zoom. So if you wanted to get closer to your subject, you literally have to move closer to them physically. So that's kind of a disadvantage there, but the aperture tends to be higher. If you look there, you see that Nikon 50 millimeter, I own that one. Or no, I don't actually. But anyway, I own the 1.8, but whatever. It's 1.4, so that means your aperture can open even wider, which is good. It doesn't seem like it would make a big difference, but it does. So like I said, the versatility isn't there. You have to switch lenses. If I wanted to go to a portrait lens, I would have to go to an 85 millimeter and change the lens out and stuff like that. So that it lacks the versatility. Yeah, so that's kind of the difference between the prime and the zoom. And that's kind of important to know when we talk about the iPhones as well in a minute. Okay. So yeah, basically with I don't know a ton about smartphone camera anatomy. I just kind of like read a little bit about it. But basically you have the main difference between a smartphone and a DSLR is that a DSLR has actual optical elements in there in the form of a lens. That's why they're heavy. The lenses, the actual, glass lens is heavy. And so for a zoom lens, those zoom lenses, those really high quality zoom lenses, they weigh a ton. In fact, I used to have to use a strap just so I could grip it, just so I could keep it in my hand. They're so incredibly heavy. So a smartphone camera, what it does is it uses a computer to mimic the optical features that you get from using a DSLR camera or an SLR. It's not digital, but they all are now. So yeah, so that's kind of what's going on here. It's trying to mimic those optical features, and sometimes it does it well and sometimes not so much, as we'll see. Okay, so just the plus and minus points. I mean, I think each one of these has its pluses and minuses. Obviously the smartphones are much less expensive for the quality than a Nikon. So like my Nikon DSLR and the lens together, probably about $3,000 used, so, and whereas you can get like an iPhone 12 Pro Max for like 1,200, I think, or 1,000. So they're definitely, less expensive. They're definitely more convenient, compact, they're portable, and the technology just improves all the time. There's also not as much of a learning curve because these DSLR cameras, I took the first class on how to use it. And then I got hooked and I took a bunch of other classes, but you practically need to take a course almost on how to use them, because it's definitely a learning curve there. So I think, you know, the iPhones definitely have a lot of pluses. The main plus with the DSLRs is that, yeah, the image quality, it's better. I mean, you just can't, the iPhones haven't, or the smartphones haven't quite caught up yet to the just superior image quality of the DSLRs. But I think smartphones are great for everyday use. I'm going to Colorado in a couple of weeks, and I'll definitely I'm probably going to mostly use my smartphone. So this is just an example I took the other day of my cat. I took a photo of my cat with the Nikon Sigma art lens and the Pro Max. So you can kind of see the difference. The light gathering ability of the Nikon, you can just kind of see it's a little bit better. And I did a close-up of his eye just to show you kind of what it looks like, the sharpness. The sharpness isn't too bad on the iPhone Pro Max, but I'm more disappointed actually when I take pictures of people and I zoom in on their eyes. I can really see a difference in the sharpness. For him, this one really worked out well. But it's really comparable. I mean, for most people, you can see it's got some funky, it's doing some funky stuff here around his tail, where it tries to like imitate that sort of depth of field. And so it kind of creates, we'll talk about what it's doing in a minute, but it can create some weird visual stuff, like around his tail. It looks like he's got a little halo around his tail. And then right here in the left-hand corner, the couch is in super high focus, which is weird. So, you know, most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but to me, the DSLR is higher quality. Okay, so switching now, I'm going to talk about how to take good portraits with the DSLR or the smartphone. It applies to each, you know, to either. So the main thing I really appreciate, and I think most people do, I don't know, in photography, is getting a candid shot of people. That it's very tricky. It's easier with kids, but yeah, it's a hard thing to do. This is what I did in order to get nice, candid, you know, sincere expressions out of people. So the first thing was I got my camera 100% ready to go. I usually, if I'm with my DSLR, I would make sure I had everything, all my settings correct. You know, the shutter speed, aperture, the ISO, I had everything ready to go. And you would do the same with your phone camera. And then once I had it ready to go, I kind of start pretending it wasn't there. So in the case of a DSLR, you kind of have to hold the camera to your eye. You know, but with a phone, you don't have to do that. You can kind of hold the phone off to the side. But I would just kind of pretend it wasn't there. I would direct them to do something. If I was working with a family, I might have somebody tickle somebody else, or, you know, just trying to create some interactions. Or a lot of times with kids, I would have like a parent stand behind me and, you know, make faces or something, just to try to create some kind of mood or emotion that I could capture. With adults, you know, you just have to, like, you know, with conversation, make a joke, you know, and I'm just ready. Whenever I feel that emotion coming and that moment coming, I'm just ready to snap it. So yeah, and I read this one somewhere else, and I thought it was really good, that a portrait is actually a record of interaction between yourself, the photographer, and the subject. So you're capturing that emotion. And so that's why candid shots a lot of times look better. Taking family portraits is extremely difficult. I never want to have to do that again. But yeah, so the difference here, like here's an example. This is a pose shot. You know, they know Dad's taking the picture, and there I am. And but in this one on the right, I had his dad stand off to the side. These are my kids, by the way. I had his dad stand off to the side, and I had, you know, my husband do funny stuff. And he was kind of slightly amused, but the result was still like a softer expression. You know, so it worked out well. I mean, the one on the right is the one I'll definitely would frame or whatever, because it just, you know, you can connect with it emotionally. Here's another example. She's got an owl. She's just waiting for me to take the shot in the left, you know, the left-hand portrait, but on the right, you can see, you know, the expression is coming out. she's, probably scared that owl's gonna, start attacking her or something, but she's got this crazy expression on her face. So, that's the one that I'm gonna keep, because there's a true emotion, there's a connection with that photo. Here's another example. This was an accident. On the left, you have a pose shot. She's, he's smiling and he's being cooperative, and she's like, just get me out of here. I really don't want to be doing this. But on the right, what happens, they were in a tree and she started to slip and fall. And so she was laughing because she was falling out of the tree. Everybody started laughing. And so I saw that moment coming and I took the picture. It looks like everybody's having a great time, but in truth, she just was falling out of the tree. And when I saw that moment coming, I just grabbed it. Pretty sure that one I took with a phone. I don't remember, but yeah. Oh, here's some more, and then some examples of some other portraits. So on the left, this was a subject, a family that I was photographing, and I had the little girl go over to a shrub where there were some like flowering shrubs, and I had her, pick a flower and put it behind her ear. And so, her expression opened up because she was curious. She was kind of in this moment where she was, wow, I'm putting a flower behind my ear. And so her expression just opened and I caught that shot, and it looks really, it looks good because it's candid. And then I did headshot photography as well. These shots, you wouldn't believe how difficult these shots are to get. I mean, each of these was like 20 minutes of like just conversation and, kind of joking and getting people comfortable, because a lot of people don't like being behind a camera. So it takes a lot of work with adults to get these kinds of natural looking expressions. It's just amazing to me. It's incredible to me how much cameras translate emotion. You can really, you're just seeing a record of someone's emotion, which, is fascinating to me. But so that's how I think candid's always better. And then lighting. Lighting's the next thing I'm going to talk about. Lighting is huge. It doesn't matter what you're shooting with. The lighting, the quality of the light is always going to matter a ton. So as far as shooting outdoors, it's a good idea to try to shoot during golden hour. Golden hour is an hour and a half to 2 hours before sunset, or an hour and a half or so after sunrise. It's just at that time when the light is very soft, because it's being filtered through all those layers of atmosphere. If it's directly overhead, it's very, very harsh, and that kind of harsh light isn't kind to the light quality, and so that translates to people's, makes their faces look. Anyway, you'll see. Yeah, it's just the better light quality is definitely during that time of day. If you can't shoot during that time of day outside, if you're planning on going outside, photographing people on a cloudy day is good as well. It's not quite the same, but it's still good. But try to find shade. That's the best advice I could give. Try to find a shady spot, but do be aware of dappled light and avoiding that. If you're indoors, a window or soft light from a lamp is always good. And then think about light direction. Avoid backlit subjects unless that's what you're going for. And then you can use also a reflector. These are really cheap. You can buy them on Amazon for like 10, 15 bucks, I think. And they just reflect the light back. So they're really fun to play with and can be a good way to fill in shadows as well. So just some examples here. So here we have hard light on the left-hand side. That's my son. So, you can see the harsh shadows because it is in hard light. It's still a fun shot. Then we have cloudy filtered light in the middle. And then on the right-hand side is, I went too far. That's my favorite lens. I took that shot with my favorite lens, the Sigma 35 1.4. And then the light at that time, it was golden hour. And so you can just see how the light quality is just so much softer, and it's just better. So if you go out to like Herman Park or something, you'll notice that at those times of day, the photographers tend to be out taking pictures. Here's another example of golden hour light. This is a backlit photo as well. It still works. In this shot, to get a genuine expression out of him, I asked him to tickle his dad before we took this shot. And then another on the right, there's another golden hour shot. The light was just beautiful that day. So the camera, I mean, the cameras are great, but really the light is the main thing that makes your photo really, really good. And then, like I said, dappled light. So you have to be kind of careful about that, because the camera sensor kind of behaves like the retinas in our eyes. Our eyes are a lot better at kind of evening out those those exposures. As you know, when you're looking at a dappled subject outside with your own eyes, your eye is kind of evening out those tones. A camera sensor isn't as good as doing that. So some people will take a picture in dappled light and they'll look at it and go, what happened? I mean, you know, it just looks so mottled, and that's why. So that's a good thing to avoid. You know, it's very difficult to fix in post-processing. That's something that is just almost unfixable. That, along with an unsharp image, is very hard to fix. We do have what's called HDR mode, which helps with that, and I'll talk about that later. And like I said, backlighting, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. So it's hard in a way because our retinas are so good at resolving those tones, it's hard sometimes to be aware that you're shooting in backlight. So sometimes, like, it might be good to just take the shot and then look and see, you know, okay, is this too backlit, you know? But so like I said, sometimes it's not so great, and sometimes it can be artistically interesting. Just depends. But like the photo on the left, this was my kids with their cousins, and I'm just so disappointed in this photo because you know, it was just not lit correctly, and so there's nothing I can do about that. It's really hard to fix. It would have been great if we'd had like a reflector over here or something to kind of reflect the light back onto them, so to even out those light tones. And then in the middle, this is a backlit photo that works to an extent. So, and the right as well. It's a very hard light on this right photo, but it still works. The extreme contrast, the light contrast in the image, it looks good. So sometimes, you know, backlit is good, but just be aware that you might not always want that. So you have to be aware of light direction. Window light is great. If you're doing photography inside, you know, get about 3 feet away from, or, you know, depending, from a nice window, and you can get really nice lighting. Make sure, you know, if you don't want a backlit photo, make sure your subject is facing the window. So this photo on the left took in front of a really large window. And then this middle one, we were in Whole Foods, so it's like a wall of windows. So that was a great lighting situation. And then the one on the right, it's a side, it's a side lit. So the window is on the right-hand side. And I think it created like a really cool dramatic lighting situation. So windows are great as well. A focused image, sorry if I'm not going through too fast through all this. The cameras, you know, actually the 12 Pro Max that I'm using now, I think it's really great at image stabilization, you know, because which is tough sometimes to get on the DSLRs. You have to be really careful about not taking a picture that's out of focus, because it's very, very difficult to fix that. And honestly, the sharper an image, or I don't want to say sharper, but like the more focused an image, especially on a you know, on a human subject or anything, you know, like that, or any animal, it's just a better quality photo. So I've been really impressed with the 12 Pro Max and how good it is at that. So that's one advantage of using those iPhones, the phone cameras, that they're really good at image stabilization and also noise reduction. So some lenses come with the image stabilization built in, which is great. They tend to be a little more expensive. But like when I was doing my family photography or whatever, I would use certain techniques, like I would brace the camera against my body, or I would like try to hold my breath, or, you know, just to try to get that camera as steady as possible. Because yeah, the more focused the image, the better. And then the noise reduction as well. That's another thing the phones are getting better at. You can see here on the lower left, they've got a very noisy image, which means that basically those individual pixels that create the color, they're just more contrasty. You can see they're more visible, so the image isn't as smooth. Whereas if you have more, you have less noise in the image just looks a lot smoother, you know. So the phones are getting a lot better at that as well. I noticed the difference in my 12 Pro Max upgrading from the 10. Okay, so then talking a little bit about composition, how to compose a photo. So you may have heard of this before, the rule of thirds. It's something that's used a lot, of course, in any kind of composition, art composition. But basically the idea is that you're dividing your composition into 9 different areas. These lines aren't exact, just to let you know, I kind of just drew them on there. But the idea is that you want to kind of put the main point of interest in your photo at one of those 4 corners where those lines intersect. It creates more of a balance. And it also depends a lot on what you're photographing and what you're choosing to focus on. But in general, it really does kind of create a nice sense of balance in a composition. So it's a rule. It can be broken, but it's a nice rule to start playing with if you haven't already in your compositions. Like this photo right here, he's you know, tossing stones into the ocean. And so I wanted to capture the fact that he's in this little village on the right-hand side and he's near the ocean, and I framed it in such a way so it kind of tells that story. But the expanse of the ocean on the left kind of balances with him and the village on the right. You know, so it would not have been as impressive if I put him right in the center. Okay, and you know, breaking this rule, you do it all the time. It's good to break rules as well, that you don't have to follow it to a T. It's just a good rule of thumb. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to play around with it and with that rule of thirds kind of thing. But yeah, like in these situations, I didn't use it because I didn't really have any other story to tell with the photograph other than the subject themselves. So, and in this case, with the middle shot, the ocean or the Gulf kind of forms a frame around her. So I didn't feel like I needed to use rule of thirds. There was really, you know, so you just kind of have to use your own instincts on it. And then the one on the left, where it's just standing in our neighborhood. So he's my main focus. I don't have any kind of story to tell about what's going on around him. So I just focus on him, and the same with her in this shot on the right. I use rule of thirds in this one, as you can see, but there's another principle in composition where you want to try to fill the frame as much as possible with your subject, with what you're trying to talk about, the story you're telling. So in this situation, we were in the Scottish countryside. We were having a walk. I wanted to talk about, in the photo, I wanted to show that we're in this amazing countryside. It's just beautiful. But I also wanted to, you know, talk about the fact that I was with my daughter at the time. So, you know, I decided to go with the image on the left. This is the one that I chose. But as you can see, if I crop more and more, if I crop the photo more and more, the story becomes much less about the countryside and that experience and more just about her. So you kind of have to, as you're cropping your images, just be aware of that. What story are you trying to tell? But definitely fill your frame. Cut out anything that's extraneous. Like here's another example. This is a nice backlit photo. She is standing at the ocean, and you can see the image on the left, way too much information in that image. I got some seaweed and some junk here in the foreground, and we don't need to see any of that. I just want I want the picture to be about her and the ocean. So I cropped it down. I'm a little bit outside of rule of thirds on this one, but I thought it worked. So, you know, so just keep that in mind. Don't, you know, just try to fill the frame as much as possible with what your subject is. Oh, this is something I use a lot in my photography, is leading lines. So if I'm out with my family or something, and I see something that's like any kind of path or anything that I can see that would create some interest or depth in a photo, I will take advantage of that. So like bridges are great for that, staircases, you know, streets, lanes, anything like that. I take advantage of that a lot. It's just something I like, because I like the way it kind of draws the viewer's eye into the scene, and kind of creates that interest and depth there. So that's something I use a lot. Not all photographers are different, so not everybody's going to love that, but that's what I like to do. Texture is another one that's, you know, good to be aware of. If you're in a situation where you see some interesting textures in your environment, like on the left-hand side, these are castle ruin walls, which have a very interesting texture to them. And so I had her sit there, and it's a much more interesting photo than if I had just had her sit, you know, outside the castle. You know, I mean, it's like I just like to combine those interesting elements into a portrait. And then the picture in the middle, that, to me, in my opinion, that would be a much less interesting photo if it weren't for that tree trunk, because that tree trunk with its like gnarled texture is so interesting to me. I just think it really adds a lot to the composition. And then the one on the right, you guys have probably seen this, is outside the art museum. I just love the texture in that sculpture there that they have at the right outside the art school. And so it's so liquidy and stuff. So I just like those things. It's just stuff that I like to include in my photographs. You can kind of see a crane here on the left. Also playing with perspective is a great way to get some interesting photos, shooting scenes from below, shooting them from above, getting right down at ground level, which is a lot easier to do with a phone than actually you know, the one on the left is also very easy to get with a phone. So phones are good for that. They're versatile. You can get all kinds of different perspectives, which I love. And then macro photography as well is a different perspective, which is kind of fun as well. This was actually the interior of a dollhouse on the right-hand side, which I thought made kind of interesting composition. You've got some framing here with the staircase. And so that's another thing, how to stretch yourself creatively, is just to kind of play with perspective in your photography. Color, I love color. If I ever am in a situation where I see an interesting, colorful, complementary situation or something, like in the middle, my cat, he's orange, you know, he's all ginger cat, he's orange. So, and he decided to rest on this kind of rug that was blue. And so I took this overhead shot because, you know, I like the contrast, the blues and the orange, you know. So if that's another way to get really a lot of interest in your shot, is, you know, just look to see where there's some interesting colors going on, and shoot that. And there's some gulls on the left. This was actually taken with my phone, and kind of played with the colors a little bit just to get them to pop a bit more. And then on the right, I just love that palette that's formed with the whites, blues, yellows, you know, and so you have basically, when you kind of put all these creative elements into your photography, you have a document of the moment, but you also have a piece of like almost art, you know what I mean? So to me, that's more meaningful. Also, framing is another interesting way to get to be creative with your photos. You know, you can frame with anything. The tree here, the kids are framed by this tree trunk. We've got a really broad frame of leaves around his face. She's framed with tree trunks that's really badly backlit though. But and then I framed this shot of a castle with a stone arch, which I think, to me, in my opinion, that's a more interesting photo than if I had just taken a shot of the castle with no framing. It creates the depth. So that's another interesting, you know, fun thing to play with. Composition is so much fun. I mean, they teach courses in it, you know, in photography school. So it's a lot of fun to play with. Cutting off body parts is another thing that, to kind of be aware of. When I was taking classes, we kind of learned about that. Basically, the best way to do it is to try to include as much of your subject in the photo as you possibly can. But if you can't do that, try to avoid cutting off body parts at joints. It just, to the eye, to most people's eye anyway, it just looks a bit awkward. So it's best if you can cut off body parts, like mid-thigh. If you're taking a portrait of someone from the chest up, cut them off at the waist, that's fine, but don't cut off at the wrist, don't cut off at the elbow. Try to cut off in the middle of limbs, because if you cut off at ankles and wrists and things like that, it just makes the photo look weird. It makes it look a bit choppy and strange. So that's another principle to think about. Okay, so now the last part is getting better photos with your smartphone. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about all the tricks that I've found, at least for getting better pictures on a smartphone. I'm going to talk about these things: focal length, portrait mode, HDR mode, exposure adjustment, burst mode, and night mode. Those are all really interesting, fun kind of features that a lot of these smartphones have. So talking about focal length, this is something that smartphones, at least the more recent smartphones like the 12 Pro Max, they're doing a lot better at. So like I said, in focal length, it kind of refers to the distance between the optical center of the lens and the camera sensor. So the shorter your focal length, the wider your angle of view. So this 16 millimeter, you can see it kind of creates a fisheye effect on her face. It's including more of the scene because it's that 16 millimeter wide angle lens. So you can see it creates distortion here as well. So that's something you always have to be aware of with those wide angle lenses. They do create some distortion. Then on the flip side of that, the 200 millimeter is the long angle. So you have less distortion, but you're also including less of the scene. So you're not as able to capture enough as much of her surroundings as you are with a wide angle. A portrait length, if you're using a DSLR, the perfect portrait length is an 85 millimeter. That's the one that creates the truest, true to life features. It's the least distorting of all the lenses. So it's the best. That's the one that most photographers used for portraiture. So that's what the cameras, the smartphones, are trying to imitate. And so they're getting better at that, but it's something that's difficult because this is achieved by, like I said at the beginning, by using those optical glass lenses. That's how it's achieved. So the smartphones are using a computer to mimic that. Okay, so on the new 12 Pro Max, and I'm not sure how Androids are doing this. I don't know anything about Android smartphones, but on the new iPhone, you have 3 lenses. If you flip the phone over, you'll see there are 3 lenses on the back. So you have an ultra wide lens, a normal length, like normal lens, whatever, and then you have a telephoto. So basically what these are in effect prime lenses. So there's a difference between digital zoom and optical zoom. I hope I'm not getting confusing here, sorry. But so basically those lenses are putting you at those certain focal lengths. But if you zoom out, you're creating a digital zoom, not an optical zoom. Whereas an actual, zoom lens, the big heavy lenses I was talking about before, those create an optical zoom. So there's a difference between the two. Digital zoom is it's lower quality. So that's what you're doing on a phone. When you have a phone and you're zooming in, you're not actually getting a true optical zoom. You're getting a digital zoom. So what this means basically is like, it works for most situations, it works fine. But if you're trying to like get, if you were trying to use your phone as like a telephoto lens, and trying to get a really good shot of something that's far off, your image quality is really going to suffer. So yeah, so you can see that on the bottom. On the right-hand side, this photo was taken with like, 150 really long lens on a DSLR camera. And the one on the left was taken using digital zoom on a phone. So you can see where, you do sacrifice some in quality. So that's the difference mainly, between the phones. I mean, for the phones and the cameras, sorry. Okay, and then depth of field. This is something else that the phones, the phone cameras are trying to imitate with computers. So your depth of field is basically the lower your depth of field, the narrower, or the lower that number, the narrower your depth of field. So if you have a very low aperture, like say 2.8, that camera lens is going to put a very narrow depth of field in focus, and everything else will be out of focus. And so it's an optical feature that works, with DSLR. So the smartphones, they're imitating that, but they can't truly imitate it because it's an optical feature. I mean, they can't, it's not really, it's just a computer generated kind of effect, right? So it's not always perfect. But it's kind of fun to play with. And basically what the phones do is they kind of blur the background to make it look like a true depth of field situation. Okay, so my tips for using the portrait mode, get creative with it. It's not just for people. You can try it out on all kinds of subjects. You have to kind of beware of the weird bokeh, like, the circles, those are called bokeh optical effect. It tries to imitate those, and sometimes it does well and sometimes it doesn't. So you kind of have to be aware of that. But the great thing about the phones is that you can adjust that depth of field in the phone after you've taken the photo, which is really great. So if you see some weird effects, you can always kind of, back off a little bit with the depth of field, with that blurring effect, and kind of see what you like for your photo. Because like in this one on the bottom is taken with my iPhone, I don't like this weird blurring thing it's doing around his tail. So I might want to just go in and re-edit that photo and sort of like back off on the depth of field so it's not so extreme. Yeah, so you can adjust that in post-processing. So that's I think it's a really neat effect. It's fun to play with. And then this is another one that's great that the phones do really well is the high dynamic range. So you probably have seen that on your phone, the HDR button. So basically you can do this in DSLRs as well. So basically what it is the camera is taking several different photos at once to try to capture all those ranges of light exposure. So that you want to be able to expose the church well. You want to get all those colors in there, but you don't want to have the sky blown out, totally white. So what the camera does is it combines those photos and creates a balanced, range of exposures. So you see the sky, but you also see the church, and one's not totally dark and the other one's not, blown out. So you have that balance, right? So that's a really good feature that a lot of the phones have that I think, definitely play with that. But be aware that if you're wanting to get creative and do like a backlit shot, you definitely want to turn off HDR because the high dynamic range, like this image on the left here, it would not have helped with the situation because it's an artistic, we want her to be, like that, we want her to appear in shadow. So the HDR would try to fix that, and we don't want it to do that. And the same with the other images that are backlit. So if you're looking for something artistic and you're trying to get like an artistic backlit shot, definitely turn that HDR off, so that the camera won't try to fix the exposure, the balance in your photo. Okay. And then this is a great thing. I don't know how many of you know about this or not, but you can actually adjust the exposure and focus in your photo as you're taking the picture. So if you're, you've got your camera on and your phone and you're looking at it on your screen, if you tap on the screen, the camera will adjust where it exposes that image and where it's supposed to control focus as well. So like, for example, in the left image, I took a picture of my cat hanging out. So I tapped on the image outside, like, where the sort of mulch is. So it exposed it. What the camera's doing is it's making that section of the picture in balance. So it's kind of putting him more in shadow because it's trying to just balance that one part of the photo. Whereas if in the next shot, I told the camera, okay, well, I want you to expose for him, for his body. So the camera exposed him well, but then of course you've got the mulch outside. Now it looks like white and blown out, So that's something that you can play with in your photos, which is kind of fun. Tap around the screen and get the camera to expose for different parts of the scene and see what you like and see what works best for you. And then burst mode is I love burst mode. It's really, really fun to play with as well. It's great for capturing action shots. Every phone is different. Some phones use I think the volume button, and some, it just depends on your phone how you access burst mode. So I would Google it if you don't know how to access it. Just Google your phone model and burst mode and get instructions for how to use it. But I love using burst mode. It's really, really fun. It's a great way. And this is something you can do in DSLRs as well, but it's a lot more versatile and convenient on the phone. So this is how I got that photo on the top of her jumping into the pool last summer. I used burst mode, and I got this great photo of her right before she was about to hit the water. So it's really fun. You can get all kinds of great shots with that. And then night mode. Night mode is a really fun one as well. I don't know. I know it's on the 12 Pro Max. I don't remember if it's on the 10 or not. I think it's on the 11. But anyway, this is basically you're creating a long exposure. So the camera is keeping its lens open for for like few seconds so that it can gather all of that light. So these photos were taken down in the cisterns in Houston, and they have a show that's going on there right now. So I use night mode. Actually, my camera automatically switched to night mode when I was in this area, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, so I think these are like maybe 3-second exposures where the camera just stays open for 3 seconds to gather all that light. So this would be a fun thing to play with if you're in a dark environment, or maybe you're trying to take a picture of the stars. If you're in an area where you can see the stars, you can try playing with it. One thing that would kind of be fun to do maybe is get like a stabilization, something that could stabilize your camera, like maybe a little tripod or something, and then aim it at the sky if you're in an area with a lot of stars, and then use that really long exposure, like maybe expose for like 10 seconds and see what you can catch with your phone. That would be kind of fun. Oh, and then this is the last thing. I'm doing really good on time. Good. So the last thing I want to talk about is the RAW format. iPhone Pro Max, this is new. They now have a feature where you can shoot in RAW. So the RAW photo is like an totally unformatted, unprocessed. And so it's a bigger file. So because it contains more information in that image, basically. So more data is preserved, and that means that you have much more processing control over that image. So on the other hand, you can see this photo on the left is shot with the phone, not in RAW. So it's creating a JPEG automatically. So what it's doing is it's basically processing that photo for you and spitting out what it processed. And you're losing data you have less control, less creative control over how that image comes out. But it's a quick and dirty, like, oh, I kind of just want a nice picture. But you can see the difference here. I don't know if you guys see this, but on the left, it's made his skin look a little bit almost orange or something. I don't know. It's just done something really weird with the color in his skin. So I had to go in after I shot this picture this morning. I went in and I changed it. Like I edited it a little bit to kind of tone that down. But if you zoom into his face, like you can really see where it's lost a lot of sharpness, like a lot of clarity, a lot of, yeah. So, I mean, so it is nice to be able to shoot in RAW. And here's the RAW photo on the right, which now I can now take this photo and I could process it. I could process it in Photoshop on my phone. I could do whatever I wanted to it, and it would preserve a lot of the details and stuff in the picture. So that's a kind of a neat feature that the iPhones have, that you can shoot in RAW. But the only downside, of course, is they take up a lot of space on your phone. But that's kind of an interesting direction that the smartphones are going into. So, okay, so yeah, 10 minutes. So just some recommendations if you want to learn more about photography. Locally, I really recommend the Houston Center for Photography. They're great. They have great instructors, really top of the line. Glassell School as well. I've never attended there, but I hear they have pretty good classes. Also, it used to be lynda.com, but now it's LinkedIn Learning. They have some really pretty good photography classes on there as well, especially for using Photoshop and stuff like that. But I've enjoyed some of the classes on there as well. And then this is one that I love if you're interested in Lightroom and Photoshop. This is not free, obviously. I don't think any of this is free, but Flearn is a website where you can go and they give really good tutorials on how to edit photos in Lightroom. They're really, really good, Lightroom and Photoshop. So yeah, so that's it. I know I threw a lot in, and I hope I wasn't too over the top with all the jargon and everything.
Oh, no, not at all. We do have a question for you. This person has an iPhone that is full of photos, and they've been choosy and deleting them one by one. Later, when they go and they look, the photos are back. What should they do? What are they doing wrong?
The photos are back? They're back?
Yes.
Oh, that is so odd. Well, I mean, I would make sure to go into the settings, and I think if you go into your settings and you go to camera, now, I mean, I'm no expert on like iPhones and stuff, but I would think that if you went into your settings and made sure that the camera was, your phone is deleting those photos. I wonder if it's like it's keeping them in an album or something. Because I mean, in an iPhone, you have albums, and then you also have your, look at my phone. So you have albums, and then you have your library. So you can save, if you deleted a photo from an album, but you didn't delete it from your library, then it would stay on your phone. So that's one situation I can think of. The other thing is that your camera, at least my phone camera, it keeps deleted photos for a while. Like I think it kind of keeps them for maybe 60 days or something. So you would need to go in and make sure that those are getting deleted and that the camera is deleting them. So I would go into settings and go to your camera settings and just make sure that those are actually being deleted. That would be my suggestion, but I would have to look at the phone. Oh, and Melanie says sometimes there's an album of recently deleted. And oh, auto backup, yeah, auto backup could be on. There could be a whole load of different reasons why that's happening.
Have you ever tried those tiny lenses that they advertise for the iPhone, Bronwyn, that you can buy and put them on externally?
Yeah, I did. And I didn't, with the 12 Pro Max, you don't need it because you've got those 3 different lenses. Yeah. So you've got that optical zoom or zoom out or whatever. So you don't really need them as much. But yeah, I have played with them. I wasn't that, I don't know. I didn't find, I have a friend who is very, very, very much into sort of nature photography, really close up, and she sells prints, and I mean, she's got the whole thing going. She just uses the 12 Pro Max, but she used to use, like when she had an older version of the phone, she did use those lenses. Like she had lenses that she would kind of, change out and stuff. but now she just uses the 12 Pro Max. So it's really encouraging, the fact for me that the phones are getting better and better at this stuff.
In terms of photography quality, yeah.
Especially if it's just like close up. Like if you're trying to do like nature photography, like you're trying to like take pictures of birds or, you know, alligator, I mean, whatever, like it's going to be a little less impressive for sure. You know, you would need, that's why you see those photographers out there with their big heavy lenses, because you can't, there are certain things that the phone just can't do, you know. But
yes, this will be available on our YouTube in the live playlist later on, and you can always go back and watch any of our live programs since we've gone virtual in that playlist. And I really appreciate you coming out and teaching us so much about photography. May is actually National Photography Month, so really hit the mark and gave us a good baseline to start with for taking some of our own, you know, best summer photos, because I know everybody's thinking, okay, it's vacation season, I want to get good pictures. So we really appreciate you coming out here to live today, Bronwyn.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
With summer in mind, just to keep in mind, for summer, Life is actually switching to a summer time slot. We are going to be doing, starting next week for the month of June and July and August, we are going to be going to a noon time slot so that you can bring your lunch and come and hang out with us and learn something about different aspects of life. I can't resist a pun. But next week I'm really excited because one of the things you were doing, Bronwyn, was you were taking these awesome photographs of your cat. And I have 2 cats myself, and I'm a big fan of felines. So next week begins our programming with the wonderful librarian Regina Vitolo, who's heading up Adopt a Cat Month in June, and I encourage you to check out several of her programs. But next week she's going to be here with us at Life at noon to discuss catifying your house.